The 1980s had their champions. They had showmen, they had heroes, they had personalities. But only one man could evoke pure, instinctive fear before the first punch was even thrown. Mike Tyson wasn't just a boxer. He was a phenomenon, a psychological experiment, the embodiment of aggression shaped into perfect form. When he walked into the ring, it wasn't a show. It wasn't entertainment. It was something between a ritual and an execution. Black trunks with no logos, no colors, no excessive details. No pomp, no long stares into the crowd. Only focus. His gaze wasn't fixed on his opponent. It was fixed through him, as if he had already seen his fall. People often remember the knockouts. Brutal combinations, bodies collapsing helplessly to the canvas. But even before the punch, there was another weapon, aura. Tyson didn't enter the ring like an athlete who wanted to win. He entered like someone who wanted to dominate, to crush, to erase resistance. And his opponents could feel it. Many of them later admitted that just looking at him planted doubt in their minds. And doubt in boxing is fatal. When a heavyweight weighing over 100 kilos begins to doubt his own chances, a single moment is enough, and it's over. Tyson created that moment before the opening bell. But to understand fear, he first had to experience it himself. His story didn't begin in luxury training halls. It began in Brooklyn, in a place called Brownsville. In the 1970s, it was somewhere you didn't go out at night without a reason. Apartment blocks, broken sidewalks, police sirens, and constant tension in the air. Kids didn't play baseball for fun there. They learned to survive. Mike grew up in an environment where weakness wasn't an option. His father practically disappeared from his life. His mother, Lorna, tried, but she was fighting a reality bigger than herself. The family moved often. Money wasn't certain. Stability didn't exist. Little Mike wasn't the biggest kid on the street. On the contrary, he was often mocked. He had a higher voice, was more sensitive, more introverted, and that made him an easy target. He was bullied, robbed, humiliated, and slowly, in his mind, a simple rule formed. You are either the victim or the predator. His first love wasn't boxing. It was pigeons. He raised them on the roof of his building. It was the only place where he felt control. The only place where he didn't feel small. But one day, an older boy killed one of his pigeons right in front of his eyes. And that was supposedly when the first real fight came. The first explosion of violence that wasn't just defense, but a reaction to humiliation. This wasn't a moment of sporting discovery. It was a moment of personality fracture. By the age of 13, Tyson had been arrested more than 30 times. Thefts, robberies, fights. It wasn't sophisticated crime. It was chaotic defiance. A child without direction who believed respect could only be earned through force. With every arrest, his reputation on the street grew. And with every fight, so did his aggression. The system eventually sent him to a juvenile detention center. For most boys from Brownsville, that was the beginning of the end. Another step toward prison and a final fall. For Tyson, paradoxically, it was the first step toward something else. But at that moment, no one knew it yet. At that time, Mike was just accumulated anger. A mix of pain, fear, and the need to prove to the world he wasn't weak. He had no discipline, no structure, no one to show him that his aggression could be a tool instead of a weapon without direction. Inside him, massive insecurity mixed with a need for dominance. And this contrast, a child afraid of being hurt and a young man determined to appear invulnerable, created the foundation of a personality that would later paralyze the entire boxing world. Before he became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, he was just a boy afraid of being weak, and the world gave him a reason to be afraid. Juvenile detention was meant to be punishment. For most boys from Brownsville, it was just another step toward a harsher reality. No second chance, just another kind of cage. But here, Mike Tyson's life began to break in a different direction. Mike wasn't a quiet kid in the facility. He was explosive, always ready to fight. He often sought conflict, as if he needed to confirm his own existence through violence. Like one of the counselors, former boxer Bobby Stewart noticed something else. When Tyson fought, it wasn't just mindless swinging. He had instinct, speed, a natural sense of distance. He could react before others even had time to think. Stewart took him to the gym, gave him gloves, and for the first time in his life, Mike was given a chance to use his aggression differently than as street defense. Not as chaos, but as sport. Stewart soon understood this was beyond his abilities, that this boy needed someone exceptional. So the phone rang in the home of a man who had spent years dreaming of creating another heavyweight champion. Cus D single quotes Amato. Cus wasn't an ordinary trainer. He wasn't someone who just counted push-ups and corrected stance. He was obsessed with psychology. He believed the fight begins long before the punch, that a true champion is a product of the mind. And when he first saw Tyson, he immediately recognized the combination of talent and deep inner wound. Cus understood one thing: Mike was full of fear, and that was exactly why he could be dangerous. Instead of suppressing his aggression, he began to shape it. He explained that every fighter is afraid, that fear is natural. The difference between a champion and the average is that a champion accepts fear and uses it as fuel. Tyson absorbed this concept because his whole life he had been fighting fear of weakness, humiliation, becoming a victim again. Cus began repeating one sentence to him over and over: "You are destined to become the greatest heavyweight fighter." For an adult man, it would be motivation. For a child without identity, it became a new reality. Mike moved into Cus's house. It was no longer just training. It was a complete transformation of personality. Cus read him books about the history of warriors, told him about the mentality of gladiators, taught him to understand boxing as the art of control, not just physical strength. He instilled discipline, morning runs, precise routines, endless repetition of technique until perfection. For the first time in his life, Tyson felt structure, order, direction. Then came the style that would make him a heavyweight. Nightmare. Peak-A-A. Style originally developed for smaller fighters, so they could break through the longer reach of opponents. A low stance, slightly bent knees, hands high at the cheeks, constant head movement from side to side, short, explosive steps forward. Every movement of the head wasn't just defense, it was preparation for the counterattack. Tyson wasn't the tallest heavyweight. He wasn't the longest. But thanks to the peekaboo style, he could eliminate the height difference in a fraction of a second. He dipped his head, slipped the punch, and immediately answered with a combination that went first to the body, then to the head, liver, hook, uppercut. Opponents often didn't even see where the punch came from. Cus taught him that combinations had to be deadly and fast. No wasted energy. No long exchanges. Tyson was meant to get inside, unleash a series, and leave. He was like a spring stretched to its limit. And when it released, it was too late to react. The training was brutal. Hours of work on the heavy bag. Hundreds of repetitions of the same combinations. This wasn't about creativity. It was about automatism. Cus wanted Mike to react without thinking. He wanted his body programmed not and here. One of the most frightening combinations in boxing history was born. A child who had spent his entire life fighting to survive was given instructions on how to use his aggression perfectly. Tyson wasn't just talent. He was a project, an experiment. Proof of what happens when you take raw street anger and give it discipline, philosophy, and belief in personal greatness. Now, but every monster needs its creator. And the question hanging in the air was simple. What happens when that creator disappears? Under Cus D'Amato's guidance, Mike Tyson wasn't just becoming a strong boxer. He was becoming a machine. Every day was precisely planned. Morning runs before dawn, school, training, studying film, repeating combinations until the movements became instinct. In the amateurs, it quickly became clear this wasn't ordinary talent. Tyson felt different, not just physically. His movements were compact, explosive, without hesitation. He didn't wait. He didn't test. He attacked. And when he attacked, opponents fell. He won the Junior Olympics, collected victories, and built a reputation spreading across the boxing community. But his amateur journey wasn't without cracks. He dreamed of the 1984 Olympics. He wanted to represent. He wanted a medal. He wanted confirmation that he was the best among the best. But in the qualification, he lost to Henry Tillman. It was a hard blow. For most young boxers, it would have been demotivating. For Tyson, it was an insult. Another sign, the world gave him nothing for free. A different goal began forming in his mind. He wouldn't just be an Olympian. He would be a world champion. In 1985 came the professional debut. Tyson was 19, and from the very first fight, it was clear the professional ring would be his natural environment. His early opponents fell quickly, sometimes in the first round, sometimes within minutes. Body-head combination, and it was over. The media began talking about a new sensation. Fans whispered about the kid from Brooklyn destroying heavyweights, as if they were a division smaller dot. But while the world was just discovering Tyson, he was still a child who needed guidance. And then came a blow that hurt more than any hook dot in November 1985. Cus D'Amato died. For the public, it was sad news about a legendary trainer. For Tyson, it was the loss of a father, the man who gave him identity, who gave him belief, who kept him under control. Cus never lived to see his fighter become world champion, but Tyson carried his voice in his head. And maybe this mixture of pain and desire to fulfill a legacy launched him into the next phase. In 1986, he got the chance to fight for the WBC title against Trevor Berbick. Berbick was no amateur. He was the reigning world champion, the man who defeated Muhammad Ali in his final fight. Experienced, tough, physically strong. But when he stepped into the ring with Tyson, it felt different. Tyson was 20.20 in the heavyweight division. That's the age when most fighters are still gaining experience. He was going for the title. The fight didn't last long. Tyson was faster, more explosive. Combinations came in short, brutal sequences. In the second round, Berbick went down. He tried to stand. His legs wouldn't listen. He fell again, as if he had lost control of his own body. The referee stopped the fight. Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight world champion in history, a record that still hasn't been broken. It was the moment when a project became a phenomenon, when the kid from Brownsville became world champion. But it was also the moment a new chapter began, a chapter without Cus, without the protective hand, without the man who understood his inner demons. Tyson had reached the top. The question was whether he could stay there. And even more importantly, who would guide him now? After defeating Trevor Berbick, Mike Tyson was no longer just a young champion. He became the center of the heavyweight division. Boxing, searching for a new dominant figure, suddenly had one. And Tyson didn't slow down. If anything, with every fight, he seemed determined to prove his rise wasn't luck, but the beginning of an era. James Smith was the first step toward total control of the division. Strong, physically prepared, experienced WBA champion. Smith tried to clinch Tyson, restrict him, take away his space. It wasn't an easy, short, highlight-filled fight, but it was proof of maturity. Tyson won by decision and showed he wasn't just a knockout artist. He could win strategically. Then came Tony Tucker. Tall, long reach, exactly the type of opponent who should trouble Tyson on paper. The fight went the full distance. Not a brutal massacre like some of his other victories, but it was another proof of dominance. Tyson won clearly and became the undisputed heavyweight champion, holder of all major belts. He was 20-1 in age when most heavyweights are still learning. He already held the entire division, and that's when the aura was born, one that went beyond sport. Tyson wasn't just the better boxer. He felt inevitable. Opponents often looked defeated before the fight even began. They felt tension in the locker room, pressure in the ring. His style was compact, explosive, brutal. Head movement, short burst forward, combination to the body, immediate hook to the head dot once he got inside. It was almost impossible to stop in dot. Then came Michael Spinks, an undefeated champion, a technically brilliant boxer. For many, the greatest test of Tyson's career. A clash of two elites was expected. Instead, a demolition came, 91 seconds. Spinks went down, got up, but he wasn't present. Tyson broke him in a minute and a half. That night, the myth became reality, but dominance has a side effect. When you win too easily, you begin to believe you are untouchable. The money kept growing. Fame kept rising. Luxury cars, expensive jewelry, enormous houses. Tyson began living a life that was the opposite of the discipline Kased taught him. More and more people around him told him only what he wanted to hear. No one corrected him. No one slowed him down. Training was no longer the same. Focus wavered. The inner hunger that had driven him forward began to fade. Instead of feeling he had to prove his worth to the world, came the feeling that he already had done. And then came February 1990, Tokyo. An opponent named James "Buster" Douglas. Douglas wasn't seen as a threat. The odds were extremely one-sided. The public expected another quick knockout. Tyson arrived without ideal preparation. The environment wasn't professional. The training camp was chaotic. The focus wasn't complete, but Douglas didn't come for a paycheck. He came to win. From the opening rounds, something felt off. Tyson wasn't as sharp, not as precise. His head movement wasn't as fast. Douglas kept the distance, boxed with discipline, used the jab and combinations. Tyson tried to end the fight with a single punch, but it never came. In the 8th round, Tyson knocked Douglas down. It seemed the script was returning to normal. But Douglas got up, and instead of breaking, he continued. 10th round, Douglas landed a combination that shook Tyson. More punches followed. Tyson went down. He tried to get up. He searched for his mouthpiece that had fallen. Out, the look that once carried certainty was suddenly confused. The referee counted to 10. The world went silent. The greatest upset in heavyweight history was real. Tyson wasn't destroyed by brute force. He was defeated by discipline, preparation, and reality. The illusion of invulnerability disappeared in a single night, and with it, the aura of invincibility. That night in Tokyo wasn't just a sporting defeat. It was the first real mirror. It showed that without structure, without guidance, without hunger, even the most frightening man on the planet can fall. And from that moment on, the world was never the same for Mike Tyson. The loss to Douglas was a crack. But the true fall came 2 years later. In 1992, Mike Tyson was convicted of the rape of Desiree Washington. The trial became a media storm. Some saw him as a monster, others as a victim of the system. Truth, emotions, opinions, everything blended together. But the result was clear. 6 years in prison, about 3 served. For sport, it was a sensation. For his career, a catastrophe. For him personally, total isolation. In prison, there was no ring, no crowd, no opponent's fear. There was time. And time is sometimes worse than any punch. Tyson had been defined by fighting his entire life. Suddenly, there was no one to fight. He had to face himself, his thoughts, his regrets, his ego built on dominance. During his imprisonment, he turned to Islam and took the name Malik Abdul Aziz. He read, studied, tried to understand his own impulsiveness. But the question remained, can a man programmed his entire life to be a predator change his nature just through environment? When he was released in 1995, The boxing world was waiting, not for a fallen man, but for the return of an attraction promoters knew Tyson sold. Fans wanted a comeback. Media wanted a redemption story, and Tyson returned exactly as the market demanded. Fast, knockouts, explosions, power. Physically, he looked incredible. Still compact, hard, strong, but a more careful eye saw the difference. The head movement wasn't as sharp. The combinations weren't as clean. He was no longer the perfectly programmed machine from the Casira. It was power without the same precision. In 1996 came the first real test of the comeback, a fight against Evander Holyfield. Holyfield was a different type of opponent, mentally extremely strong. The 1997 rematch was meant to be revenge, a return of respect. Instead, it brought one of the most controversial moments in sports history. Frustration grew. Tyson couldn't break the rhythm of the fight. Holyfield was again solid, unbreakable. And then came the moment the world would never forget. Tyson bit off part of Holyfield's ear. It wasn't just a physical act. It was a symbol of absolute loss of control, loss of discipline, a return to the chaos he had once escaped. The disqualification was immediate. License suspended. Reputation heavily damaged. That moment defined his image for years. He was no longer just a fallen champion. He was a controversial figure, unable to control his own impulses. After returning to the ring, Tyson was fighting a different battle. No longer just for belts, for money, for survival, for image. Wins alternated with losses. Performances were unstable. The explosion appeared, but not consistently. Then came another blow. Financial collapse. More than $300 million earned during his career. Luxury mansions. Exotic animals. And finally, bankruptcy in 2003. Bad investments. Manipulative surroundings. His own impulsiveness. Tyson had once been the symbol of absolute power. Now he was the symbol of the fall. In the ring, he once controlled every inch of space. Outside it, he lost control of his own life. Without cuss, without structure, without a mental compass, his energy returned to its original form, chaos. And this is where the most important question of his story began to form. When they take away your belts, when they take away your money, when they take away the fear you once created, who actually remains? When Mike Tyson stepped in against Lennox Lewis in 2002, it was the final attempt to turn back time. Lewis was a complete heavyweight at that point. Tall, disciplined, technically refined. Tyson was no longer the young predator. He was slower, less explosive, less hungry. The fight was one-sided. Lewis controlled the distance, worked behind the jab, systematically dismantling Tyson. In the 8th round, the knockout came. It wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the symbolic end of an era. After several more unremarkable performances, Tyson effectively ended his professional career in 2005. He lost to Kevin McBride and admitted he no longer had motivation. He said he no longer had a fighter's heart, and that may have been the most honest confession of his career. But the true bottom didn't come in the ring. It came in his personal life. Addictions, debts, and the death of his 4-year-old daughter Exodus in 2009, who tragically died in an accident involving a treadmill. Tragedy that would break anyone. Tyson later spoke openly about being mentally destroyed, about being afraid of himself, about being dangerous not only to opponents, but to the people around him. And this is where his most unexpected chapter begins. Sobriety, therapy, self-reflection. The man who once spoke about violence without filter began speaking about trauma. About childhood, about pain, about fear. About the fact that his entire life he had been playing a role someone else programmed into him, that he was a product of environment and of Casa's psychology. That beneath the layer of aggression was still the boy from Brownsville. The podcast hotboxing gave him a new space. Suddenly, he wasn't just a former champion. He was a storyteller. A man capable of speaking about weakness as openly as he once spoke about strength. In 2020 came something few expected. An exhibition fight against Roy Jones Jr. Many saw it as nostalgic spectacle. But when Tyson entered the ring, it was clear this wasn't just marketing. His body was prepared again. The movement wasn't as fast as in 1988, but it was disciplined. The punches were still heavy. The audience felt a strange mix of nostalgia and respect. The fight ended in a draw, but the result didn't matter. What mattered was that Tyson, this time, seemed calm, controlled. Without chaos. Then came another chapter. A media confrontation with a new generation. The name Jake Paul became linked to his return. A generational clash. The internet era versus a legend of the 1980s. An idea that would have sounded absurd 10 years earlier suddenly became reality. The fight was announced for 2024, and once again, the question opened: what is Tyson proving today? It's no longer about titles. It's about legacy, about the fact that even in his 60s, he can step into a ring and capture the world's attention. There were also speculations about an exhibition with Floyd Mayweather. Jr. A clash of two icons from different weight classes. Two completely different styles, two entirely different philosophies of boxing. It never officially happened, but the very idea shows how powerful Tyson's name still is. Even after all the controversies, and years away from the peak. Today, he is no longer the most feared man on the planet. He is no longer the undefeated myth. He is something else. A reminder of what happens when talent receives discipline and then loses it. Proof that trauma can create a champion, but can also destroy him. A story of extremes, absolute dominance and absolute collapse. And perhaps that is why his legacy is stronger than the belts themselves, because Mike Tyson was never just a boxer. He was an experiment. He was a weapon. He was a child given the power of the world before he understood how to control it. And when today he speaks in a calm voice about his mistakes, he feels different than he once did in the ring. He is no longer a symbol of fear. He is a symbol of survival.
Leave a like, subscribe, and write in the comments what story you want to hear next. See you at the next video.